Hi there, folks. I'm going to do something completely different today, and it's about experiencing hearing loss as a musician. And this is something I experienced a few months ago, so I thought I would actually shed some light on my experience and how I actually managed to get past it all. And luckily, it all turned out okay in the end, so there is hope. All right, well, let's get on to it. So I've got lots of stuff here. These are various things, information that I had to research myself on hearing loss and the particular condition that affected me. So we're going back a few months now. It was back in May this year. I had a simple procedure done on both ears, and it was the ear microsuctioning to remove earwax. And I've had this done before, no trouble at all. And on this occasion, I came home and I just felt something wasn't right. And even at the time when I was at the clinic, when I actually got up to pay for the procedure at the end, I commented to the nurse. I said something didn't feel right in my right ear. It just sounded funny. So she just told me just to yawn and just let it do its thing and settle down. And I tried yawning and all that, and it didn't come right. But anyway, I got home, I realized something wasn't right, and I was at home that night playing the piano, just listening what was going on, and everything was just sounding really bad in this ear, very distorted. That was the main problem I was having. Certain notes on the piano were just coming through with a loud pinging sort of sound, and it was actually quite distorted, and it was really off-putting, and it actually sent me into a bit of a panic, because I thought, oh heck, my hearing's been damaged. When I had the microsuctioning done, it seemed really loud, particularly in this ear. For the first part it was okay, but then when the nurse went in to just remove one little bit of earwax which was still remaining, when she took the last bit out, it just sounded extremely loud, and I just felt, no, this can't be right. And that's when I noticed at the end that it definitely wasn't right. My hearing definitely just wasn't right. So anyway, the next day, I raced back to the clinic and just told her what had happened and said, this is what's happening. Can you advise me what might be going on? And to her credit, she actually rung up the nearest hearing clinic audiologist and got me an appointment pretty much straight away. Because something like this is actually treated as a medical emergency, because when you're dealing with hearing loss, you've got to act quickly. You can't muck around with something like that. You've really got to act on it quickly, in case these treatments that you can receive that can restore any loss so it's not permanent. But anyway, she got me an appointment at the audiologist that afternoon, and I went to see the audiologist, and of course they do the usual thing, which is audiogram, just to screen my hearing to see how it was. And so I got the results of that, and luckily I had an audiogram from last year. So I was able to compare the two results from a year ago, and so this was June last year, and this was from May this year. So this was just after I had my microsuctioning done, and it did pick up a mild hearing loss in the upper frequencies, but that wasn't my main concern. My main concern was with the distortion that I was experiencing. Now, that's not something that they can actually measure, so there wasn't any test to actually determine what the issue that I was experiencing. There wasn't sort of any particular test that could be done to actually quantify that. So all I had to go by was the fact that I had some mild high frequency hearing loss. So I got a letter from the audiologist, who then, because he had to create a letter so I could have a referral to my GP, because I needed to go to the GP to get what was known as a prescription for prednisone, which is the standard treatment for the hearing loss that I was experiencing. The audiologist actually diagnosed it as sudden sensorineural hearing loss, and the standard treatment for that is to take a course of prednisone, which is an oral steroid. And so I had to get a referral to my GP for that. And so on that same day, well, in fact, it was that late afternoon, evening, and I think this was on a Friday, so it was crazy busy with traffic. I had to then go to my GP, which was over the other side of town, and quickly get this prescription for prednisone, because it's something that you've got to do they recommend within 48 hours. If you experience sudden hearing loss, whether that be from purely just waking up in the morning and noticing that you've lost your hearing, or from some other trauma, you've got to act on it within that 48 hours, because that is a type of treatment which apparently, so the studies say, only really has any value if you act on it within that time frame. So anyway, luckily I did that, and so I got the prednisone, and the very next morning I took the first dose, because it's not something that that it's recommended that you take in the evening, because it can affect your sleep patterns and that sort of thing. So I took the course of prednisone over the next week or so, but I didn't notice any improvement. So I was still experiencing the distortion. It just wasn't sounding right. I was playing the piano. I even went to a gig, actually. That same weekend, actually, I had a booking at a retirement village where I was booked to do some entertainment, and I didn't want to cancel that. I thought, well, the show must go on. That's always been my philosophy. So I went to the booking, and it just sounded terrible. And actually, towards the end of it, all of a sudden, my hearing just disappeared in my right ear for about 5 seconds. It just went all of a sudden, and then it came back. And I thought, oh, heck, what have I done? I thought, I've made it worse now. I've been playing the piano, and I've all of a sudden created another problem. So that sort of sent me into a bit of a tailspin as well. Anyway, I got past that, and I thought, well, the next step, as per the doctor's instructions, was to actually get a referral to a specialist. So you have to go through all these processes, go from the audiologist to the GP to the specialist, etc., etc. So I got a referral to the specialist, but that took some time. I think it was roughly 2 weeks I had to wait. So during that time, I was sort of like really concerned, because I thought, well, I need to act on this quickly. I've got to do something. So I thought, well, if I can't get an appointment straight away, the least I can do is go online and do a lot of research, as much research as I can. And that's one good thing about the internet. As many problems as it causes, there's lots of issues with the internet, and how you can get sort of trapped in all sorts of areas, finding the wrong information, and becoming addicted to searching for things on the internet as well. So there's all these other problems, but fortunately it can be a useful tool. So I spent pretty much every day doing a whole ton of research just to try and figure out what it was I was experiencing, because the diagnosis that I got from the audiologist just didn't ring true to me. Sudden sensorineural hearing loss. As far as I'm concerned, my hearing loss wasn't a sudden sensorineural hearing loss, not the type that you get when you wake up in the morning and all of a sudden you've gone deaf, because people do experience that. But that's not what my issue was. My issue was that I had a procedure done on my ear, microsuction, which of course is just using a suction tube to remove earwax. And I felt that it was noise-induced. I felt that what I had was a noise trauma, which was noise-induced as a result of this microsuctioning perhaps not being done quite correctly. Excuse me one moment. Got to drink before it gets cold. So, but it was hard to convince the doctors of that, because they have their standard ways of diagnosing things, and as far as the GP was concerned, he had never heard of this. He had never heard of anyone having this issue after having microsuctioning done. And to his defence, I'd never experienced a problem as well. I've had it done many times, never been an issue. But there's always that rare case. And so I did some research online, and I came across quite a few message boards where people had experienced hearing loss through having microsuctioning done. Now, I'm not knocking this procedure. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, but knowing what I know now, I'm going to be a lot more careful about having something like that done in the future. And from what I read online, there are quite a few people who have had this issue with microsuctioning, and so you've really got to ask lots of questions and sort of just do your research before you go and get something like that done, I think. But anyway, I found out that quite a few people had had this issue, and also people have had experienced the same thing as me purely from being exposed to loud noise. And the classic example is a gunshot. So you get people who might fire a gun and they're in, close to their ear, and that's when they experience hearing loss, and it's usually accompanied by ringing in the ears. Now, the thing with me is I didn't have ringing in my ears, or this particular ear anyway, which was affected. I didn't experience ringing. It was this noise, this distortion was the issue that I was experiencing. So I found out that quite a few people have had the same issue, but I was trying to find a diagnosis because I hadn't received that from my GP. I mean, he couldn't really diagnose what it was that I was experiencing. So I did a load of research online, and I eventually came across, I came across a number of things, but what I eventually discovered I was experiencing was something called Dysacusis. And obviously there's various types of hearing issues that you can have. Obviously there's normal hearing loss, but there's also tinnitus, which most people are familiar with, which is the ringing in the ears or noise in the ears. But there's things like hyperacusis, and Diplodocus is another one which I'll come back to, and then there's things like rarer conditions like Dysacusis. And I've got an article here which I downloaded from the American Academy of Audiology, which I found really useful, but it wasn't exactly encouraging reading. The first thing I noticed was it says that most programs in audiology offer no formal training in hearing loss prevention strategies for musicians. Now, I'm a musician, and this is why I was really, really concerned about this, because I thought, well, this is going to affect my livelihood. I'm not going to be able to do what I love doing anymore. And actually on that, I've really got to say, it was the most humbling, a real humbling experience to realize that maybe I was not going to be able to get the same enjoyment out of music anymore. And it was scary, but it was also very humbling, and it just made me realize how precious hearing is. And but this is the issue. Most audiologists haven't studied this in relation to musicians, so their knowledge on this can be quite limited. And so that's what it states here. And luckily, my audiologist was really good. He was really, really helpful, but admittedly, he didn't have a lot of knowledge when it came to, as I've just said here, how hearing loss can affect musicians. And so what I came across, though, was a condition known as Dysacusis. Now, I'll read what it says here from the American Academy of Audiology, and this is to do with Diplodocus and Dysacusis, and it says this: two additional auditory disorders, Diplodocus and Dysacusis, can be particularly distressing for musicians. Diplodocus is characterized by a change in pitch perception, often described as perceiving one pitch differently in each ear. So basically in each ear you can hear a different pitch. Dysacusis is characterized as a decrease in auditory clarity, presenting as distortion of tone frequency and sound quality in both or just one ear. So, and then it goes on to say that for the performing musician, Diplodocus and Dysacusis may cause a significant enough impairment to threaten a musical career. So you can imagine that after reading that, I thought, well, this doesn't sound good. I've got this distortion in my ear. It's not going to go away. Bang goes my musical career. And so then I started reading lots of articles about how hyperacusis, especially, about how that had affected particularly classical musicians, and how their career had effectively been ended as a result of being afflicted with this condition. So I thought, oh heck, this is not sounding good. But for all the bad news that I read online, I also read quite a few encouraging reports as well. And so I was determined to get through this. And I guess that's my first piece of advice, is that if you're faced with a condition like this, don't let it stop you from doing what you love doing. You can take preventative measures, and you can take steps to actually mitigate making things worse. But my first bit of advice there is to just keep on moving forward with what you do and to not stop. And I was determined that I was not going to let this stop me from playing the piano. I thought, if I can't play my music, if I can't do that, then there's just no point in being alive, basically, because that's who I am. That's music is me. So I thought, well, the best thing I can do is just to carry on doing what I'm doing. I'll just carry on playing music. If I have to, I'll find ways to get around it and try to make things less bothersome in terms of how everything sounds. So I could turn the volume down, maybe just stay away from headphones for a start, because I didn't want to make things worse by wearing headphones, and just carry on playing music. And so that's what I did. So after all that, I got an appointment with the specialist, ENT, of course, so that's your ear, nose, throat specialist. And he did, so that was good. I went and saw him, and he did the standard tests that they do, and he couldn't find anything wrong. So he couldn't find anything that could be causing the problem that I was having. And so he could only offer really two suggestions. One of them was the intratympanic steroid injections, which involves injecting a steroid into the inner ear via the eardrum. So that's a standard treatment for hearing loss, okay, or for sudden hearing loss, and also having an MRI done. So these are, once again, the normal treatment protocols that they always go through. And having a injection in my ear, I just thought, there's just no way I can go through with that. I can't have a needle in my eardrum. I just flat out thought, no, I can't do that. But I didn't say that at the time. I just thought, well, I'll go and do some research on that and see what I can find out about it. So after my appointment with a specialist, I went and did some more research online. Honestly, I just came across so many articles. Here's a good one here that I found on the intratympanic steroid injections. And there's a lot of interesting information out there, and from what I read, what I discovered was that there's no real evidence, no real sort of concrete evidence that it actually does work. There is some evidence that it helps, and there have been positive results, and people have received positive results after having these steroid injections, but there's no general consensus as to whether it actually works or not. And even the specialist said that he did not know whether it was going to work or not. So I thought, well, I'm not just going to rush into any old procedure just for the sake of it, and on the off chance that it might work, especially if there's a chance also that it could make things worse, because you've also got to look at what the downsides might be. And that's not being negative, that's just doing basic research. So I spent a lot of time reading a whole lot of articles on this, and there was one here, as I say, that I found which I thought was really good. Basically, the conclusion was more or less, I think, what I've said. It said that the intratympanic treatment has several advantages. It is an effective procedure for the control of disorders such as sudden deafness and Meniere's disease. That's probably another one you might have heard of. But up till now, there is no consensus on the intratympanic protocol. Further studies will define the best protocol. The perspective is the development of gene therapy and intracochlear treatment. So basically, it still needs more research. But it was interesting reading, and I went onto a number of message boards, and some people had success with having the injections. I also wanted to find out what it was like, whether it was a painful thing to have done. Most people said they experienced some sort of pain, but others said that it was absolutely fine. But that was enough to sort of just put me off. I thought, no, I don't want to have this done. So I did some more research and looked at other therapies, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Now, this is one that's, again, there's quite a lot of debate surrounding this, and this is the one that involves the use of hyperbaric oxygen chambers, which is something that is used in the diving community. So divers, when they go underwater and if they surface too soon, that's a well-known issue, which what do they call it? The bends, isn't it? And there's a type of treatment that they use within the hyperbaric oxygen chamber where you actually are placed into a chamber and you receive oxygen in a pressurized chamber. And it's also something that's used for people who have experienced hearing loss. And there have been a number of studies done, and a lot of them have shown positive results. And so I brought this to the attention of the specialist, and I said, look, I really want to have a go at this, because I thought, well, this sounds a bit better because it's not going to involve a painful medical procedure, such as having an injection in the ear. But unfortunately, it's not something that's funded here. And because it's not publicly funded, it's something that, and actually it's not generally available anyway. So he couldn't advocate for me to have that done, and I tried to push it to have it done. I actually rang the one place in New Zealand, or in Auckland anyway, that offers this treatment. I actually rang them and spoke to the doctor there, and I got his advice, and he basically couldn't he couldn't see the point in me having it done. He wasn't happy for me to actually go ahead. Well, he basically wouldn't take me on as a client. And even though I said I would offer to pay for it out of my own pocket, I mean, when it comes to hearing loss, I wasn't worried about money at that stage. For me, it was like, you can't put a price on that. So in the end, it was like, well, obviously I'm going to be refused treatment. And I thought, well, the best thing I can do is maybe just try a local clinic down the road, because even though there's different levels when it comes to hyperbaric oxygen treatment, there's medical grade treatment, and there's also what you can get at your privately run clinics down the road, and that's the type of treatment which is just for, what do you call it? It's more therapeutic purposes. People often go into these chambers just because it gives them a feeling of, it just relaxes them, and they come out of it feeling sort of very relaxed, and just, it's hard to describe, but it is kind of a holistic therapeutic approach. And I thought, well, I can go and get it done at one of these clinics, but it won't be medical grade. It means that the treatment that I'm receiving won't be enough to probably have any effect, but the least I can do is try it just to see what it's like. But I was also quite freaked out about that also, because it involves getting into a sealed chamber, a sealed metal chamber in this case, where you're actually having to lie down in a metal tube, and they actually have to close the door, more or less lock you in, which isn't as bad as it sounds, because of course you can always get out, you can always get them to let you out. But anyway, they close the door and they put you in a sealed chamber, and of course supply you with oxygen under pressure. And I was a bit worried about claustrophobia, and I'm kind of quite anxious about all that sort of stuff anyway, and I wasn't really that happy about it, but I forced myself to try it, and actually, in the end, it was fine. Because when you're in one of these chambers, it's got a clear lid, so it's not like you're in a metal tube where where it's pitch black or anything. It's actually got a clear lid, so you can still see outside, and I think that's what makes a difference. That's actually what makes it bearable, is the fact that you can actually see outside, and you don't really feel like you're so enclosed then. And in the end, it was actually quite relaxing, because you're just lying there. You're receiving oxygen directly through however you describe it, an oxygen delivery system through the nose. And you're in there, and you're actually receiving it under pressure. So, of course, you're having the issues with your ears popping as well, because you've got to constantly clear your ears as you would if you're up in an airplane. So that was an interesting experience. Of course, one of the issues was the fact that it ended up costing me money as well. So, I had to pay for that out of my own pocket. And the thing with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, regardless of what type you get, it is recommended that you're going to need at least 10 rounds or 10 sessions before it's likely to have any effect. And I thought, well, I can't really afford to pay for this, even though I knew that when it comes to hearing, money is no object. But because I knew that this particular procedure at this particular clinic wasn't really going to help me, because it wasn't the level that was required to be of benefit, I thought, well, it's probably not any point me carrying on with this. But it was interesting just to try it, just to see how I cope with it. So anyway, I read quite a few studies on that, and I ended up contacting a music professor over in the United States who had experienced a similar issue to me, because this is some research I did online. So following some research, I actually found a guy online who had a similar issue to what I had, and as a musician he was experiencing the same thing. And what made it worse for him was he was a music professor who was not only a classical performer of piano and that sort of thing, but he was also a teacher. So you can imagine what it would have been like for him having a similar issue to what I had. The only difference was the condition that he had was basically what I mentioned before, the sensorineural hearing loss, and which he got purely by waking up one day and discovering that he had lost his hearing. Although he didn't actually do much about it for several days because he wasn't sure whether it was a temporary issue or what. He wasn't quite sure what was going on. And in his case, he was suffering from what I mentioned before in this article here. He was suffering from what was known as Dysacusis, where he was experiencing different pitch perception in each ear. This was something that he experienced after he had gone to his doctor to get some treatment for the hearing loss. He started experiencing this pitch difference. So you can imagine what that would be like when you're playing the piano and you're hearing a different pitch through one ear to what you hear through the other. It would just be impossible. So I got in contact with him and a couple of emails backwards and forwards, and it was really, really helpful because he was able to offer me some encouraging advice, and also he was able to talk to me about his experience. And this is one of the emails I had from him here, and he described all the procedures that he went through because he had the hyperbaric oxygen treatment, and he was able to get it done at the hospital, so it was done properly. And his was, what did he say here? That's right, he went to the specialist, he had the oral prednisone, the steroid, same as what I had. Then 11 days afterwards, after he first experienced his hearing loss, he had the hyperbaric oxygen treatment, and he had 20 treatments altogether. And then he went on to say, he says here that, to be honest, the Dysacusis took about 4 months to become unnoticeable. So even after all these treatments, he was obviously still having problems, but it took several months before it kind of just dissipated. Now, to cut a long story short, that's basically where I'm at. That's more or less what's happened to me. I am now at the point where I'm not experiencing this hearing distortion anymore, or at least I'm not noticing it. Now, I don't know whether it's a similar situation as with this professor over in the States, whether it has happened because just over a period of time I've got used to it, or whether things have just corrected themselves. What I can say is that with the hearing loss part of things, I went back to the audiologist a month later. This was a month after my initial audiogram, and I've got the results for that here. I've got the audiogram from back in May when I first experienced the problem after having the microsuctioning done. And then I got a second audiogram done a month later, and there was just a slight improvement. Okay, a slight improvement. Now, and at the same time as that, I was hardly experiencing any of the distortion anymore. So whether the improvement somehow was correlated to, or was also in conjunction with the improvement in the distortion, I don't know. There's just no way of knowing. But it was good to see there was just a little bit of improvement on the hearing side of things. And that's the last test that I've had done. So that was in June this year. So I think what's happened with me is I think perhaps I've just adapted. And the reason I say that is because I also got in touch with the university, Auckland University here in Auckland, and I got in touch with their specialist tinnitus clinic that they have, or tinnitus is the other way it's pronounced, isn't it? Tinnitus. And I got in touch with one of their professors there and told him of my experience, told him that I'd been in touch with this music professor in America. And he came back to me with some really, really interesting information. And once again, this is all extra advice. I think you've really got to not just rely on doctors. Doctors are there to do what they do. They follow certain protocols, but there's only, when it comes to certain conditions that are very specific, such as what I'm having, there's only so much they can do. You've really got to be your own advocate and do your own research and find out as much information you can from other people. Don't just rely on what the doctor tells you. And so I got in touch with a professor of audiology at the university. And I think his response alone, his words alone, were probably the best treatment that I received, because he basically said that it would get better over time. And what he said in his email, because I explained to him the distortion. This was I was mainly concerned about the distortion, and his response was, I'll read it to you now. He said, the distortion is created through the brain trying to reinterpret changes in patterns of activity created in the inner ear by sound. This interpretation involves matching to established templates based on memories of sound learnt across the lifetime. The good news is that new patterns can be reinterpreted as normal with brain experience, even if the changed patterns remain. So although sound may appear distorted and unnatural now, it is actually your ally. And you can listen to low-level sound, play by all means, but just not forte or loud. And he went on to say that the time frame around this adjustment is uncertain, and loud music should be controlled for a while. And if need be, use a musician's earplug in the affected ear, and just gradually reduce its use over a period of time. And then and about the steroid injections, he went on to say that they were low risk, and if they work, great. If they don't, well, nothing's been lost. But the bottom line was, he said, in summary, this should resolve over time, and the difficult thing is giving a prediction on timing. So that last line was what I really needed to hear, the fact that it should resolve over time, but even if he couldn't give a time frame, knowing that it would resolve. Now, I obviously responded to that and thanked him very much for his time, and he then went on to say in a subsequent email that this was his words here. He says, as you have trained your hearing brain with learning and playing music, you will be able to retune it. So low-level music that you enjoy, and through that exercise the brain, but don't try to overtrain. That's how it reads here. Just try and enjoy the sound. It will improve over time. So really what he's saying there is that it's that whole thing where I don't know if this is the right way around, but you hear with your ears, but you listen with your brain. Okay, so your ears receive the sound, but it's actually the brain that does all the processing, which actually interprets that sound. And it's very interesting how the brain can actually adapt and adjust when things aren't right or when things go wrong. So I took that on board, and I believed in what he said, and I felt yes, it will improve, because obviously he knows what he's talking about, because he's a professor of audiology, so he knows about this sort of thing. And I'd read about similar things online, and I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. So I don't have to keep listening to loud music. I can stay away from loud music, but I can just stay confident in the fact that it will improve as I get used to it. And I believe now that's actually what's happened. Now, what I've decided to do, or what I now no longer do, is I'm not using headphones, because I was using headphones a lot for practice. So I've got the headphones here. These are ones that I was using for practice and listening and just playing music. So obviously I'd put these on, plug into my keyboard, and just immerse myself in the sound. That's why I like wearing these, because you really felt you were right in the sound. But I've stopped doing that now, just because I'm really wary of making things worse or just creating another problem. And I'm just trying to just get used to not using headphones and just still having the sound. Like, I have a couple of speakers set up, and I can still have the sound going through those instead, but just not loud. And I'm just sort of gradually getting used to operating like that rather than using headphones. So I'm staying away from headphones. That's the first thing. But I also got some musician's earplugs. So I went back to the audiologist and thought, well, I've been needing to get some new ones anyway, because my other ones were basically had it. I'd had them for about 10 years, so they're well past the use-by date. And I decided to get some musician's earplugs made. And these are specially molded ones, so you actually have to go to the audiologist, and they actually have to create molds from taken from your ear canal, and then they send those molds off, and then you get the actual plugs made specially. So that's what I had done, and so they just slot in. You can get different colours, but these ones are just a clear silicon They're made of silicon, so it's medical grade silicon, and you can bend them and all that sort of stuff. So you can actually take the filters. They've got filters here which attenuate the sound. I've got 10 dB filters in here at the moment, so they attenuate the sound by 10 dB. And I also got another set of filters which attenuate the sound by 15 dB. And because it's silicon, you can just sort of bend it like that, and you can actually just pop the filters out and just change them over. But they obviously just fit in. You just have to put them in your ear and sort of just push them in. And the great thing about the musician's earplugs is that for these particular ones anyway, they're designed to actually help limit the amount of occlusion. And occlusion is the sound that you get of your own voice as it vibrates through the skull, I suppose you'd call it. So if you block your ears and you listen to your voice, obviously you can hear it reverberate in your own head, and that's obviously quite off-putting if you're trying to sing and perform music. So the good thing about these is because they're they go quite a long way into the ear canal. That is actually what helps prevent this occlusion is what it's called. That's what helps prevent that effect, because it helps prevent the sound from traveling up the ear canal and then vibrating around the skull, which I think is what causes this sound of your own voice, if you like, reverberating in your own head. I mean, that's how I understand it anyway. So you can never get rid of it completely, but by having these ones that are, as I say, go right in and are actually specifically molded to the ears, it does help limit that. So I'm trying to get used to using these. Now, of course, they cost about $300, so they weren't cheap. But, I figured that's a small price to pay just to have these for two reasons. One, I can use them for rehearsing, so that if I do want to use headphones, okay, what I can do is put the earplugs in and then put my headphones on over the top. So I do that sometimes. And also if I'm performing in a very loud situation, which isn't very often, so not so much for that purpose, but if I'm in a loud situation where it's perhaps a small room or a hall and and the volume's quite loud on stage, then at least I can use these. I haven't really tried it for that yet because I'm trying to experiment with perhaps arranging the sound on stage so that it's not coming at me, or so I'm not dealing with loud sounds around me. If it's more just going out that way, then I'm probably not going to have such an issue with on-stage sound. But it's there as an option. And the other thing as well, and this is what I have used them for, is if I'm going to a concert and there's a band playing, if it's really loud, then I'll definitely use these. And the other reason why that's good is it makes it so much easier to talk to people. When you're in a loud concert venue and you've got music coming from at the front and you've got people trying to talk to you, so it's so much easier to do that when you've got these earplugs in, because of the way that it filters the certain frequencies. So yeah, they definitely got their uses, and I think a really worthwhile investment. So I got those made. So that's another a recommendation there, another tip. I think definitely look at getting earplugs made if you can afford it, especially if you're a musician. I really recommend doing that because, as I say, you can't put a price on hearing. The thing that I learned about hearing is that it is actually the one sense that is really, really hard to adapt to if you lose it. Believe it or not, and now you'd think that any sense, whether it's smell, taste, sight, sound, whatever, you'd think that any sense, no matter what it is, you wouldn't want to lose it. But hearing is the one thing that can really isolate people if they lose their hearing. And I now understand what that's like. And that's why I'm really hoping that this video will help people, because A, you don't want to be in a situation where you permanently lose your hearing, and B, at least if you do experience something similar to me, you know that there's hope and there's a chance that it will improve. And it's just something that I've learned, that with hearing, it's not something you ever want to lose, because it does really affect your day-to-day life so much. So definitely protect that hearing, and that's what I'm trying to do now. And it's not to say that you want to go overboard. Like, I won't go outside and walk down the street and put on earmuffs or put on earplugs just because I'm worried about sound. it's not worth doing that. You never actually want to hide from sound, okay? Don't ever hide from sound, but don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to be exposed to really loud sound, okay? If you can do anything to prevent that from happening, then that's what you should be doing. But definitely protect that hearing, and definitely do your research, because there's so much information out there, and all you've got to do is, particularly online, if you just find the right articles, and if you can decipher that information and just weed out the stuff which you know isn't going to help, but actually go for the stuff which does seem to have some validity, such as this article here from the American Academy of Audiology. I mean, you know that's probably going to be pretty legitimate information if it's coming from them. Do your research, and then talk to your doctor as well, because I passed a lot of this on to the doctor and the specialist, and discussed it with them, and I thought maybe it helped them as well, because I mean, they don't know everything. Obviously they are specialists in what they do, but they don't know everything, and if you are able to assist by doing your own research, well, why not? Because that brings me to another thing, because the other thing is, of course, all of this costs money, and I ended up with spending quite a bit of money on all this to pay for all the specialist appointments, doctor, audiologist, and so it was quite a bit of money, and I've got all the receipts here for that. But because I did my research, I decided against spending money on things like having the intratympanic steroid injections, because that was going to. I mean, the specialist was trying to sell me this procedure. Basically, he said, "Look, I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm prepared to offer you these. You're going to need one a week for the next 3 weeks." Well, however much it was going to cost me, $200 a pop or something, I thought, well, that's a lot of money for something which probably isn't going to help. Plus, there's the potential uncomfortable pain involved, and whether or not it's going to make things worse. So it's all money. It's all money, perhaps spent for nothing. And I thought, well, I'm not going to line someone else's pockets. I'm not going to spend money on something which probably isn't going to help. So there's the money thing to consider. I will say, though, that one thing I haven't mentioned was I went and had an MRI done, because that was part of the treatment procedure, and the specialist referred me to the hospital to get an MRI done, and I have to say I'm really thankful that A, it was able to be done pretty quickly, and B, that it was covered through the public health system here, because that would have probably cost about $1,000 if I'd had to pay that out of my own pocket. And in the end, I got the report back from the specialist who said that the MRI came back normal. And because they have to check for things like, what do they call it, a vesicular schwannoma, which is a type of benign cancer, benign tumor that sometimes can occur on the auditory nerve, and that can sometimes cause the problems with hearing, especially hearing loss. And it also screens for anything like intracranial tumours and that sort of stuff. So that all came back normal, and that was all covered, luckily. So really, that's it. That's my experience. Hopefully, you've gained something from all that. Certainly, I think the best thing to do is just not jump into any procedure that's offered to you. Definitely do your research on it, and always know that there's hope. And look, in the end, my hearing, it may not be perfect. Perhaps it will never be spot on, but it's certainly not causing me any problems in day-to-day activity. And I'm playing music again now, and I'm not experiencing any issues. So if you've got any questions, feel free to let me know. And by all means, let us know if you've had similar experiences, because I think sharing knowledge is really important. And if we can all share a bit of knowledge and offer our experiences, especially on specific subjects like this, then there's potential there to help so many other people. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope this has been of help to you, and I'll see you hopefully in the next music related video, and we'll see what that is. Probably be an original song or something like that. I've got something I'm working on doing, so we'll see you there. All right, folks, you take care. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.